So as we go through the session and hearing the guest speakers, if you have any questions through the session, can you put them into the group chat for me? And then after the guest speakers and specialists have spoken, we'll then go through the Q&A, if that's okay with everybody. You just literally, if you've not done it before, you type a message there, so test, and the questions come up and we can read them later. Okay, so over to Matt in a second. If I can just introduce our guest speakers. We've got Andrew Hoswit from the BCRS Loans. Andy, just give us a wave. Thank you. And then we've got Kerry Horton from the FSE programme, from the FSE group. Okay, so they're going to be taking you through the available funding shortly. But firstly, over to Matt Hoswit, which is our funding manager for the Stoke-on-Trent Growth Hub. Thank you. Over to you, Matt.
Thanks, Pam. So good morning, everybody. Thanks all for joining us. We wanted to put this seminar on just because it felt as though over the last week or so things had slightly changed with regards to the government support that was available. There'd been on the initial release of COVID support from the government, there was a lot of talk about the grant funding, the retail grants, the rate relief grants that were coming out the tens and the 25,000s. And the government recently announced a couple of weeks ago that there was some discretionary top-up grants. But we do get the feeling that that is then going to be the last bit of grant funding that's going to be available. And it's kind of moving to this trying to get everybody back into work at a safe time and safely as possible. So, purpose of today, we wanted to get together a couple of our funders who are our partners through the Growth Hub programme, who predominantly pre-COVID were looking after the Midlands Engine investment funding. And as part of that funding, they had access to what was the old Enterprise Finance Guarantee Scheme, which has now become the new COVID CBILS lending facility. So because of the grant funding kind of ceasing and reducing, we thought a lot of businesses now that are looking to access this finance are going to be using debt as an option to get those businesses funded again. And obviously the CBILS funding and the bounce back funding are two big areas where that can be helped. So it's really a Q&A session today. We've got my colleague Becky, who heads up the helpline for us as well here, who can obviously give us a bit of detail later on about how the Growth Hub and the helpline can support you. But I think that the majority of you on this call already know how the Growth Hub supports and helps, and we're here to be supportive to you as always. So without further ado, Andy and Kerry will go through their programs. It's very much we want, interaction. If you've had experience with the bounce back loans or the CBILS loans, or you're having problems, or you've got concerns or questions, please start to put your questions in the chat box. Anybody who's not used this before, who's not used to it, if you hover at the bottom of your screen, it'll bring up a bar and you can click your chat there and go into it and there. Put your questions in. We've got the guys here to answer. So make the most of that. One thing that I did want to mention to you though is through the Growth Hub programme, we do have a scheme called the Investment Readiness Programme. And this was actually launched prior to the COVID pandemic. And it was a grant scheme to stimulate or help businesses to access growth funding. Since COVID, we've slightly changed this to be a bit more reactive to the current situation that we're in. So in a nutshell, the Investment Readiness Programme, it's a grant and it can help businesses, it's ERDF funded, so it's usual European funding rules, which is you've got to be an SME, you've got to be based in Staffordshire and predominantly a business-to-business entity. But it's a small grant that helps you to pay for professional support. So if you're approaching a lender or a grant fund or an equity provider, whatever that may be, and they ask you, which they will now, for business plans, financial projections, cash flow forecasts, those kind of things, this grant will help you to pay a third party to prepare those for you. So if you need your accountant or business advisor or whoever it may be that you're using, somebody external to your company, to prepare your cash flows and business plans, we can give you a grant of up to 60% to help support that. Sorry about that, phone in the background. So it'd be 60% grant with a minimum of £1,000, maximum of £3,000. So it's quite a nice way of just helping you, because obviously it's a costly time at the moment. And I know the government, we'll get into this later, have done some support with regards to fees and whatever on the loans. and this will help you with an additional 60% of some costs if you need them. As I say, usual ERDF criteria, you can access that by either contacting me directly, and I think Pam will get the contact details put later on in the chat function, or by calling Becky on the helpline as always. So that's that. The good news is that you can use that grant to do business plans and cash flows to access the bounce back or the CBILS loans funds as well. So if you're looking at accessing that funding, you need support, by all means get in touch. I will shut up now and pass you over to the other Hustwit, which it's Andy, who heads up the BCRS business loans locally, and he'll just give you an overview of what his company and fund does, followed up by Kerry, and then we'll go into the questions and answers for anybody that needs support after Becky's done her growth hub intro as well for you. Okay, Andy.
Thank you. Good morning, everybody. Just a quick sort of brief whistle-stop tour about BCRS, who we are and what we are doing in the current climate. BCRS has been around for a number of years, about 17 years now. We're a regional lender. We're a community investment company. We're a not-for-profit, so we don't have shareholders. And we lend, or historically, pre-COVID, we lend money to businesses that are unsuccessful getting their funding from the banks. So if you've ever had a decline from a bank, BCRS would get involved. And as long as you're a viable business with a decent proposition, we would look to support in whatever way we could. Predominantly pre-COVID, that was using the Enterprise Finance Guarantee Scheme, which a lot of you may be aware of. That scheme, as Matt rightly says, is currently on hold and has been replaced by the CBILS, which is the Coronavirus Business Interruption Loan Scheme. And we are very much predominantly now focused on that scheme. We aren't lending any other monies really at the moment, unless it's CBILS related. Our lending for CBILS is between £50,000 and £1 and 150,000. The reason why it's 50,000 and £1 is that we would always push people to go to the bounce back loan first. That's a better option if the 50,000 is enough for that business. If you need more than 50,000, then we obviously recommend the CBILS loan. And if you're unsuccessful getting the CBILS loan from your bank, then BCRS are willing to have a look and assess your proposition. I cover Stoke-on-Trent and Staffordshire, although BCRS covers the whole of the West Midlands, but Stoke-on-Trent and Staffs is my area, and we're happy to have a look or chat to anybody that's interested. Thank you.
Thanks, Andy. Kerry, do you want to just tell us a little bit about the FSE group, and similarly to Andy, what you're doing at the moment?
Yeah, sure. We do exactly the same as BCRS and Andy do, in as much as, we're a CIC. We've got 200 million of funds under management at the moment, predominantly in the south. So we started in the southeast. We've got a fund in London, a fund in Cornwall. And in January, we were awarded the MEIF contract for the Midlands. So we've got 42 million to distribute across the Midlands patch. There's 4 fund managers. I look after the kind of Northwest Midlands patch, so Birmingham up to Stoke and across sort of Telford, Shropshire way. And we lend between 100k and £1.5 million with a similar sort of investment remit as Andy has. And we're hoping obviously to get those out to kind of growth businesses. Now, the one thing I would say about our CBILS offering is that we're hoping that we will be lending to growing businesses. So we will provide CBILS products for businesses that we will then create a pipeline effectively for the standard MEIF funds. We were only accredited about a week ago, so we are still formulating how that's going to work, but we are going to put that out shortly. We lend on intangibles, we lend on forecasts. This is not a historic backward looking thing. This is about supporting growing businesses who otherwise would probably have to go down the equity route because it's market gap funding. Banks won't have a look at it. Perhaps they've exhausted their appetite. We work alongside them and their accountants to formulate the best plan for the customer and find a way forward for them.
Sorry, I was miles away then, Kerry. Thanks very much for that. that was brilliant summary from the both of you. Thank you. So don't forget, if anybody's, we've had some questions start coming through now. If anybody's got anything that you specifically want to ask, put them in the chat, and we'll get round to those as we get through the webinar this morning. Becky, can we just ask you to give us an update on Growth Hub and Helpline and what we've been doing and how we're helping businesses and what's available at the moment, please?
Yeah, of course. Okay. Morning, everybody. My name's Becky. I manage the business support helpline for Staffordshire. And I think it's just important to introduce that as a central point of contact, because we appreciate that all of these schemes are really confusing. So we can still advise on the job retention scheme, the self-employment scheme, it may be the CBILS loan, the bounce back loan, the top-up grant schemes and so on. And I think it's really difficult for SMEs to understand which sort of support provision they fit into. So use me as a central point of contact. Pam, if you can perhaps pop the business helpline through the chat facility, but also any web inquiries, so you can email business inquiries and that will hit me, and then we'll sort of assess what support is available. Again, just to simplify that support to a business. I think it's probably worth mentioning as well that we have specialist advisors. So whilst Matt Huswitt is the specialist in funding and finance, he also manages the investment readiness programme that he mentioned at the beginning. But we've also got specialist advisors in HR that can specifically talk to you about the job retention and self-employment scheme, but also a specialist marketing advisor as well, if you need to sort of realign your marketing strategy as a result of COVID. So again, just contact me through the business helpline or business inquiries, and I'll marry in the support and assess your eligibility where relevant, and then sort of, help you to understand what support you can tap into by assessing your eligibility.
Brilliant. Thank you, Becky. Okay, so it's over to you guys. If you've got any specific questions that you want to ask Andy, myself, Becky, Pam or Kerry about the CBILS or the bounce back loans, or about anything more general. Obviously, Becky and I are here to answer any questions like that. Over to Pam to...
Yeah, we've got a question from Donald Harrison. So as a micro SME that has been developing a product through the grants and self-funding, he's not been eligible for any CBIL, Innovate UK or bounce back loans or any other government schemes. So the main reason being they're a self-funded non-profitable organisation. So what schemes can help him to grow in the UK and develop international markets? So over to Matt, Andy and Kerry, I think, for a mix of answers on that one, please.
Yeah, so Donald, from reading the question, it would sound that, are you on the screen? I don't know if you can nod. It would sound as though you're kind of an early stage or a startup business.
Well, yes and no. As Pam knows, I've actually been trading in various guises since 2014. But in 2016. And from 2014, I was doing consultancy services, so I was a service provider. In 2016, my wife invented a product which was helping with eyesight problems, and I switched from service mode, earning money, to product mode, costing money, by helping her get it through design and development, proof of concept. At the end of last calendar year, November, we actually got it CE accredited, and we did a clinical trial or a clinical evaluation with Aston University, which rapidly took us into selling mode. So we had to find a distributor, got the CE mark. So just before COVID, we were in discussions with the DIT about potentially looking for European distributors, because we want to stay in a business-to-business mode, and we wanted to work with distributors rather than selling direct. When COVID hit, my accountant advised me that I should be eligible for various support, and just to sit back and wait and see what schemes became available. As they started coming out of the Exchequer, I applied for them, but invariably in the small print, I was excluded because I either didn't want to borrow enough, or we hadn't been trading long enough. We couldn't do forecasting because Rebecca and I are ex-NHS employees. We're not business entrepreneurs. We wouldn't like to try and stick a finger in the air and guess how many of the products we're going to sell. So we weren't able to tap into the majority of the COVID schemes. The only scheme that we did get some support from, and that only came through on Friday, was a discretionary grant from East Staff's District Council. So now what we want to do is use that as a funding opportunity to use for match funding scenarios to start taking the development forward. Lots of international interest for the product, so that's where that line of interest came from. But the other element that we just wanted to start was a sports setting opportunity for people that shoot. And so there's a new element of research and development that we want to go to. It's more market research rather than product research. The product's fit for purpose, we just need to change the material. So there's some new product, as well as how do we get help to keep the company going to develop international markets.
All right, Donald. Yeah, it sounds like probably you would benefit from obviously having a one-to-one with a business advisor, so that you can actually get into the depths of what you're looking to do and how you're funding that, which myself and Becky will pick up with you after the session. Just as a general comment, and I'll let Andy and Kerry add anything to this, is obviously the COVID-related support was brought in specifically to help existing businesses to trade through a period of non-trading. It sounds as though you were kind of a little bit of a pre-start early stage, but not so, because you've just slightly changed it a bit. In normal circumstances, we would highlight and recommend that another scheme that the British Business Bank have on offer, similar to the Midlands Engine Fund, is the startup loan schemes. And they have been very active during the COVID period, where they are still lending money through the startup loan schemes, which, if anybody doesn't know, it's loans of up to £25,000 per business owner at 6% fixed, and it's subsidised through the government, through the British Business Bank. So normally we would perhaps steer you through there, dependent on what your trading history is. But secondly, it may be that you're not eligible for the COVID lending, but potentially, like the guys have said, Andy and Kerry, you could still potentially access their normal funds. So you're not going to get it as interest free, unfortunately, because it's not a COVID related facility, but you could still access some of the money. Andy, is that fair to say?
Yeah, it's. I think it's a timing issue, Donald, for yourself, where you've been caught. You know, the business was going in certain steps and certain stages, and then all of a sudden this COVID's hit, and it's just sort of has changed everything. Because the COVID funding that we have, the C-bills and the bounce back loans that the banks have, are very much survival funds. They are there to just support an existing trading profitable business prior to COVID to get through this period and to start trading again. Anybody during that period that was growing or developing a product, of course, at the minute is sort of left empty-handed. And our funds, BCRS, startups early stage are difficult for any funder. And Matt's quite right. The startup loan company is fantastic for that, because potentially if you and your wife are both shareholders in the business and directors, you could go and get £50,000. There's obviously conditions and all sorts that you'd need to look through, and Matt and the team would help you with that. But BCRS would look at deals like that, like yours. Where we struggle is if you are pre-revenue. So if you are pre-sales, and we understand that you've invested probably a lot of your own money and you've raised as much as you can from various sources to develop your product or service. If at that point then you can come to us with a forecast showing, sensitized figures on a worst case scenario, and you've got letters of intent or contracts with suppliers or wholesalers or whoever it may be, then BCRS can have a look at that. What we can't fund is if you really have no idea as to how many products or number of volume of units you're going to be selling, and at this stage you don't know who you're selling those into, because we can't really make a lending decision on that. But certainly we can, have you chat with the Growth Hub initially, and Matt and the funding team, and then Matt and I can have a chat about the situation, and we can see if we can help or if we know anywhere else that we can help you.
Can I just add to that? Donald, first of all, I picked an email up from you this morning, so I'll come back to you on that along with the other detail you supplied in the chat as well. There are some proof of concept funding schemes that we could potentially signpost you to, but also there's an R&D element here, isn't there? So it may be that we can sort of signpost you to one of the universities, potentially, particularly Keele, their Business Bridge programme and so on, for some R&D support. So again, I'll take it offline and I'll pick it up with you via email if that's okay. And between myself, Matt and Andy, we'll come up with some support provision for you.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Thanks for the question, though, Donald. Anybody else got anything else to ask? Whilst you're potentially keying in your questions, just a couple, Andy and Carrie, that we get asked a lot through the Growth Hub, which just we could box off. You mentioned, Andy, earlier that some businesses perhaps have gone for the bounce back loan of £50,000, but then perhaps find, with uncertainty as to how long this period of close down and getting back into work and trade recovering, that may not be enough. Can businesses top up? Can they come back? Can they come to you and have you or Kerry and have a CBILS loan if they've had bounce back, or if they've already had a CBILS loan and that's not enough? Can they top that up as well?
Yeah, it's an interesting one, this, because there's been, and I saw it in my business, where there was a lot of customers that were in early stage discussions with myself about CBILS funding, and then the government launched the bounce back loan, which is an incredible scheme. As an ex-banker, you're not going to get commercial borrowing at that rate anytime soon again, for the 50,000. And we saw a big switch from pending applications with ourselves moving to the bounce back scheme, which is great because the bounce back scheme is incredible, and I would urge anybody that is eligible for it to take it as a worst case fallback scenario, because the worst case is at the end of the 12 months, if you haven't used it, you can just pay it all off and it's not cost you a penny. It's very, very simple to get through the banks, through their online platforms. I've heard some fantastic stories about how easy it is to get hold of that funding. The downside is that potentially that 50,000 isn't enough for a business, because we still are in a period where we don't know when that tap is being turned back on in terms of certain businesses, especially the leisure, restaurant sector. We don't know when that's all going to start coming back into play. So these businesses are still very much, well, I don't know if 50,000 is enough. And if it isn't enough, you can apply for a CBILS loan. However, my understanding is that you can't have both. You can't have a bounce back loan and a CBILS loan. So if you require more over and above the bounce back loan, you have to repay that with the CBILS funding. So then, of course, dependent on which lender you go to, because some lenders, again, are offering interest and capital free for the 12 months. At BCRS, the government pays your interest for the first 12 months of the CBILS loan, but you are still liable for the capital in that first 12 months, and then capital and interest beyond that period. So you need to make sure, A, that the 50,000 is enough. If it is, great. If it isn't, then you need to be speaking to your advisors, your professionals, your accountants, the Growth Hub, whoever it may be, because potentially you're going to be replacing a relatively or a very cheap facility with something that costs a little bit more, and you need to be aware of that, really. But yes, you can top up CBILS funding. You can have more than one CBILS loan as long as you're under the maximum, which I think it's quite a hefty sum. It's about 5 million, isn't it? But you can't have a CBILS and a bounce back together.
Okay, brilliant, thank you. Again, we've had a question from, sorry Pam, I'm stealing your thunder here, but I just spotted the question. So, as a discretionary grant ERDF, what do I record in terms of state aid balances on the expression of interest funds? We believe, Donald, that the discretionary grants that you're getting from the local authorities, whilst we would always recommend that you keep a track of them and, for Bolton braces, pop them on your form, we don't think that they're going to have a major impact on any ERDF funding, because we think they're going to monitor them slightly differently and use different different terms, but we can double check that on individual cases. Plus the RDF allowances, you're up to €200,000 over a rolling 3-year period anyway under the de minimis scheme, so it's quite a chunk. But yeah, I would always say belt and braces, just declare it anyway, and then the funders can decide and work out what's eligible for you. Anybody else got any other questions?
Again, Matt, sorry, just to add to that, for anybody that's not familiar with the discretionary grant fund, just to cover that off, so when the Chancellor initially announced the small business grant funding for anybody that was in receipt of small business rate relief and so on, if you weren't eligible for that scheme, the government then made a further announcement for something called the discretionary grant fund, or the top-up grant, and it's something that's being distributed through your local authority, and they're defining their own criteria, so you'd need to visit their website. Typically it's for anybody that acquires commercial premises, anybody that's got ongoing fixed property related costs, but again, just to visit your local authority website to see if you fall under their criteria.
Oh, Pam, you've spelled Hustwit wrong on the chat. Oh,
Have I? Whereabouts?
That's one thing that's going to start annoying us. I joke.
HUST. Oh, I forgot. It's double T. Right.
All right, don't worry.
Sorry.
Just one other thing that we do get asked a lot for is the CBILS funding. Is there any restrictions as to what it, obviously legally, is there any restrictions that it can be used for? Can it just be used for general cash flow? Does it have to be used for anything in particular? Does it have to buy a piece of equipment? Can it just be put in? I'm assuming the answer is it can just be put into your cash flow and used for the ongoing running of that business.
Correct. Yeah.
Great.
The whole point of the funding is to just provide a slug of cash, and we, when I'm assessing a lending application, we will always have the conversation with the customer or the client to make sure that they've explored all the other options available to them. So have they benefited from the breaks with HMRC? Have they done the furloughing of the staff? And when we look at the forecasting, we say, right, what is your absolute minimum position to just keep that business ticking over if you are selling nothing for that period, whether it be 3 months or 6 months, and whatever that gap is then on a cash flow forecast, that's the sum of money potentially that business needs. So they can just throw that lump sum of cash into the bank account and it would let their business survive for however many months. If, of course, you're getting towards the end of that period and needing to increase, then, of course, if it's CBILS, you can top up or you can increase that borrowing. But that's where the key for me is the financial information is really important.
Great, which don't forget, everybody, if you're eligible, and there is a little bit of eligibility for it, but if you're eligible for the investment readiness program, a lot of these, from what we've heard from Andrew and Kerry, these schemes are very dependent on your projections as to what's going, because obviously you've got a reduced trade at the moment, so to prove that viability, we're looking forward at the projections, and that's where the investment readiness program can help you with preparing those projections. Can one of you just, because I know when these schemes were first launched, and I know it was changed, just for the audience, can one of you just go through a little bit about the personal guarantee issue? We know it was changed to be more favourable to the business, but if you could just kind of top and tail that for us, just so that everybody's aware of what they're liable for now as far as personal guarantees are concerned.
Do you want this one, Kerry, or me? Yeah, the personal guarantee is quite a big issue for, obviously, owners, directors of businesses, because predominantly most banks or lenders will take a personal guarantee where they can for any debt. I know at BCRS we historically always took personal guarantees, and we make no bones about that. We always take them, and it's part of our lending. For the CBILS lending and the bounce back lending, the government has made it very clear that personal guarantees aren't to be taken as long as the debt is below £250,000. Above £250,000, then it is at the lender's discretion. But the government has suggested that they only take a personal guarantee for the 20% that isn't guaranteed by the government on a CBILS facility. Now, it's important at this point that as a company director or owner, the personal guarantee in some respects it's not irrelevant, but you are liable for that debt through the company regardless. If you're taking a loan out, you're taking a loan out, and you should, be doing that in good faith, in a position to repay that loan as and when it's required. The government have made it very clear that even though the CBILS funding is 80% backed by the government, you are still liable for 100% of that borrowing, and the government only kicks in as a very, very last case resort. So you need to, all I would say is general common sense is just be really careful and make sure you've crossed your T's, dotted your I's if you're making any applications or applying for lending, as you would do in a personal situation yourselves anyway.
Okay.
Yeah, the one thing I would add to that, sorry, is that don't feel that you need to have the level of assets behind your personal guarantee that matches, because I get quite a lot of queries from people who, simply don't have assets in the background that would make up the value of their PG. That's not what it's necessarily there for. It's there because, it shows personal investment in it. It's kind of a behavioural thing that says, I believe in my business, I'm backing my business, and we're in it together. So don't feel that you need to have assets up to the value of your PG. Just be mindful that this is a debt and a responsibility that you're taking on.
Great. And would we always recommend first point of call for any business owner to approach their main high street bank first, or their main funder, as long as they're registered on the scheme? Anybody that doesn't know, if you visit the British Business Bank's website and go through their programs, there is a whole list of accredited providers of the bounce back and the CBILS and the large CBILS lending. But yeah, we would generally always recommend that, because they've got your existing history and they know you as a client and potentially can get it quicker. We would always recommend that you speak to your main bank first of all.
Yeah, just to add to that, Matt, certainly speaking from BCRS's point of view, is we aren't, as part of our service commitment to the British government and the British Business Bank, we aren't able to compete with the banks anyway. So if we as a lender believe that client in front of us could get that debt from their bank, then we would push them that way anyway. We have to either see evidence or take a self-certification statement from a customer to say that they've approached their bank, because we're not competing in their space. We are additional funders when the banks say no. The downside, or the only caveat to that I would say, is some banks, Handelsbanken namely, aren't in a position to offer CBILS or bounce back funding just because they aren't accredited by the British Business Bank. So we do see applications from those customers, because I appreciate that most of the banks are focusing very heavily on their existing customers for CBILS and bounce back facilities. So we will assess that. We'll look at any deal, but we need to make sure that you've been to your bank first.
Thanks, Sam. We've had a question from Daniel, just regarding the investment readiness program. So I'll just top that off. I know Becky's answered as well. So can you apply for the investment readiness program to cover costs associated with accountants preparing an application for R&D tax relief? Short, sharp answer is no, unfortunately. The investment readiness program is very much specifically around third-party support for applying for funding. So it must be linked in with some application for either grant funding, equity funding, or debt funding, but it doesn't include the tax relief, because that's a profit and loss tax benefit that you're going through there, rather than a loan or a grant, unfortunately. So yeah, it has to very much be applying for debt funding or grant funding. I hope that was clear. It didn't sound clear in my head when I was explaining that there. The answer's no, unfortunately, but we can speak offline if you need further support with that.
Okay, thanks, Matt. Has anybody else got any other questions that they want to ask? Emma, no? Are you happy with all information? Steve, Chris, Lena? Ina's gone. Donald, are you happy with what we've discussed? Is there anything else you want to ask? No.
Don't forget, it's always a snapshot as we speak at the moment. Like Becky says, the growth hub and the helpline is there. If anybody wants to a one-to-one, so that you can speak. If you want to speak privately with a business advisor, we can still do those over the phones or via Microsoft Teams or Zoom, whichever you would prefer. Donald will make contact with you to have a more specific chat. If you want to go through that, that's exactly what we're here for. And we've got, as you know, close on to 100 partners that we work with that we can refer you and signpost you into. And that's not just about funding, that's about training, recruitment, skills, those kind of things as well.
That's smashing. So if we've got no other questions, we will close this webinar and say thank you very much for attending and hope you found it really useful. And we've put our contact details down the side. Forgive me, gents, for putting an extra T on your name. I'm so sorry.
All you've got to remember is Twit, Pam. That's all you've got to remember.
Oh, God, yeah. After all these years.
It's quite easy if you know them. Yeah. So just to reiterate, Pam popped the business inquiries email address on there. So if anybody wants to take anything specific offline, just drop it over to me and I'll pick that up this afternoon.
Smash him. Okay, have a great day, everybody, and thank you for joining. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye.